listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. It's been 3 years since the Taliban took back control of Afghanistan following the disastrous withdrawal of American and Allied troops in 2021. Despite promising to respect women's rights, within days of regaining power, the group had banned girls from going to secondary school. Since then, more than 140 orders have stripped away the rights of girls and women in the country, the latest of which includes women's faces or voices in public.
I think what's happening with Afghanistan is that after decades of war and then the international community's portrayal of the oppressed people of Afghanistan, the world has become desensitized to the suffering of people in Afghanistan.
In today's deep dive, we're breaking down the situation for females in Afghanistan right now and finding out what we can do to help. First, though, it's time for the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. Today's Wednesday, the 4th of September.
G'day everyone. Hey Sacha. So we begin today in Paris at the Paralympics, where the Aussies have netted more medals, including gold. James Turner taking out the men's 400 metres in the athletics, and he broke his own world record in the process.
I don't think they're going to get him, and Turner triumphs again. World record. What a run. Third games, third gold, world record. 500th medal for Australia. He's got everything.
Oh, I love that celebratory voice. That audio thanks to Nine.
Yeah, and in the pool we've won 2 bronze, Rachel Watson finishing third in the women's 100-metre freestyle S3, while Alex Safi rounded out the podium in the men's 100-metre butterfly S10. And in the wheelchair basketball this morning, sadly, the Rollers have gone down to Great Britain in the quarterfinal 84-64. Now, on the medal tally, China is way ahead with 50 golds. Australia is sitting at very respectable 7th place with 9 golds.
Not sure if you caught Sacha Paralympic swimmer Tim Hodges. He shared a really beautiful message to children living with disabilities. That's after he finished in 4th place. He was chatting to Nine, where he said, you want to stand out for the right reasons, and having an impairment or a limb or any difference, physical or mental difference at all, is something that should be celebrated. It's part of life. And he says, for him, it's putting flames on my leg. For someone else, it might be having an interesting hair colour or a cool-looking arm. It's about leaning in and celebrating that difference and using it as a superpower if you can.
Yeah, it was such a great message, and the Paralympics are so wonderful for that, and how important for kids to see that as well. What a lovely, lovely thing for him to say. Australia's ambassador to Iran has been summoned to the country to explain a social media post made in support of Wear It Purple Day, a day that supports LGBTQ inclusion. The post on the embassy's Instagram page, which is still live, shows staff sitting with Ian McConville wearing purple, and the caption talks about the importance of ensuring queer youth feel proud to be themselves.
Yeah, so Sacha, I jumped onto Instagram, I had a look at the post. It's written in Farsi. There's thousands of likes, thousands of comments, many of which are super supportive of the post. But Iranian state media says that the post promotes homosexuality, while the government has condemned the post, deeming it norm-breaking. It's important to know that being gay remains illegal in Iran, and it can be punished by the death penalty.
Iran's, what they call semi-official news agency, has reported on comments by McConville, who's the ambassador. He apparently said the post wasn't intended to insult the Iranian people and their values, and that the Islamic Republic was not mentioned in the post at all. And Australia has maintained a diplomatic presence in Iran since it first opened its Tehran embassy in 1968. So it'll be interesting to see, the fact that the post is still up.
Yes.
I think communicates McConville's position on that, but whether he has to capitulate and take it down, we'll wait and see.
Back home now to Sydney, where 2 sailors have been rescued hundreds of kilometres offshore after their yacht started taking on water. So the pair, which included a 48-year-old woman and 60-year-old man, have praised emergency services for their efforts, saying they're stoked to be back on dry land after spending 19 hours clinging to their damaged vessel.
We had a good sleep on the way back. Didn't sleep much last night, but the communication from everyone was wonderful and we knew what was going on at all times.
So the pair issued an emergency alert from the Spirit of Mateship. That was on Monday afternoon after the yacht suffered mechanical failures.
Yeah, and rescue efforts were initially delayed by huge waves, 6 metres high, 60-knot winds, but emergency crews did manage to safely retrieve the two friends, and this was just before 7:30 yesterday morning, but it then took them all day to get back.
Yeah.
That's how far out that they had drifted. They were given a coffee and a meat pie from rescuers. The sailors said they were excited to be reunited with their families. One of them, Brett, he was asked what it was like to hear from his son over the phone after being rescued. Here's what he said.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was good. Soon you didn't ring me on Father's Day. Maybe you did. Did you? You did. Sorry.
And do you think you'll head back out to the water? I'm going back out Thursday and probably in a couple of days' time going back out. Not so far out. Might just go in the Broadwater or the Gold Coast for a little bit.
Oh, it's so great to hear them in good spirits.
Yeah, Brett did say, that was Lisa speaking there being like, yeah, I'm going to head back out on Thursday. Brett's made the comment that he's enjoying dry land for right now. He doesn't want to head back out on the water.
Yeah, fair enough. And as for the fate of the Spirit of Mateship, the vessel's been abandoned. It once raced in the Sydney to Hobart, but authorities made the point that they're in the business of rescuing people, not boats.
And we've got a rare update on the King's health. During a visit with cancer patients in Bath in the UK, Queen Camilla told reporters Charles is, quote, doing very well amid his own cancer battle. Her comments come at an interesting time because there have been rumours swirling about King Charles's health in recent weeks and how well he is. He did reveal his diagnosis back in February and has been undergoing treatment for about 7 months, although we still don't know what type of cancer he's got.
I just love that only the royals can get away with saying words and not actually communicating any meaning. Like, they are the masters of vague platitudes.
Oh, yeah.
We've only been told it's not prostate cancer. At the end of April, the 75-year-old resumed public engagements and has built up to a pretty full schedule, prompting talk. Camilla thinks the King is taking on too much and could compromise his recovery, and the pair are due to head down under for a visit next month.
We don't know much about the visit, except that apparently it'll just be in New South Wales and the ACT.
Yeah.
So Sydney and Canberra. I mean, Sydney's great. Canberra's, I think we've talked about Canberra before, which is, it's actually a rogue great place, but they're going to be doing pretty
diplomatic-y stuff.
Boring
Yeah,
stuff.
he won't be cycling and stuff like that.
It'll be our first visit to have a reigning monarch here since 2011. That's a long time.
And afterwards, they'll head to Samoa to join leaders of the 56 Commonwealth nations for the biannual Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, something that apparently still happens.
Antoinette, thank you so much for joining us for the headlines today. Next up, we are doing a deep dive into what is happening in Afghanistan at the moment, especially when it comes to women. The situation for women in Afghanistan right now is bleak. After retaking control of the country in August of 2021, the Taliban has wasted no time reinstating a raft of horrific rules, stripping away the rights of females. A week ago, a decree made it illegal for women to speak outside their homes. They also now have to completely cover their bodies head to toe in thick fabric. They are banned from working and can't look directly at men they aren't related to. Afghanistan is the only country in the world as well where girls are banned from attending school after completing the 6th grade. For activists and advocates, what has happened since the Taliban came back into power is not surprising. It was a similar picture in the late 90s and early 2000s in the country. But that doesn't mean they've given up fighting. Today I'm joined by Shabnam Safa. She's a refugee advocate in Australia and a member for the Action for Afghanistan campaign. And she came here with her family as a Hazara Afghani refugee. Shabnam, thanks so much for your time today. Could you start by explaining to us exactly how limited the freedoms are for girls and women in Afghanistan right now? But also, can it get much worse than it is now?
Thanks, Sacha. That's a good question because I don't think that the women in Afghanistan have any freedom at the moment at all. We cannot say it's limited. The women and girls in Afghanistan at the moment are living their worst nightmares. They have no freedom to leave the house without a man, so they are restricted to the 4 walls inside the home. They cannot study, they cannot work, they cannot go to public spaces, they cannot participate in sports, they can't go to gym. The only place that women could potentially go to is the cemetery to go and be there, probably a little free. So what the women and girls of Afghanistan are enduring right now is horrors that we've only heard in stories that we cannot even imagine for ourselves.
Last week, the Taliban banned the sound of a female voice in a public area, in public spaces. I'm curious to know how women in and also outside of Afghanistan have reacted to this latest decree. How have they kind of been protesting it?
The Taliban have done that obviously very intentionally because it's through the control of women's bodies and women's lives that they establish and enshrine their power and control in Afghanistan. But the women of Afghanistan don't accept this for themselves, and they never have. Over the last 3 years, they have protested. They're protesting now as well, this new decree. Their voices are supposed to be silent, but they are singing. They are posting videos of themselves singing on social media, knowing very well that that could be a death sentence for them. And they have resisted and protested every other decree, every other law against them. It's just that we don't hear it and we don't see it outside Afghanistan because nothing from Afghanistan makes its way out.
I'm curious to understand how the situation is. Looking back in the late 90s and early 2000s, the Taliban were in power. I remember as a young schoolgirl in Australia learning about the plight of girls and women, and we were hearing the stories about girls who couldn't go to school and how awful that was. Then the invasion happened and the war in the Middle East with America getting involved. And from what I understand, there were gains made in terms of at least legislation for women in Afghanistan in trying to wind back some of those extremely harsh and restrictive oppressions against women. But now we're kind of back. It's been 3 years since the Taliban has been back in force. So I guess my question is, like, how hard is this for the women of Afghanistan who have experienced something different perhaps for the last decade or two to now be in this position where, as you said, they have no freedom?
The 2 decades before the return of the Taliban, women's rights and human rights and a general improvement to democracy and freedom was on the rise and rapidly rising. And when you include women to society, the society thrives. And that's what we saw in Afghanistan. We would see women judges, women's achievements in sports, in arts, in music, in culture development, in military, in government administration, every area of life in Afghanistan, women were a part of it, and they were not just a part of it, they were thriving. They had hopes and dreams for how they wanted their country to be rebuilt, and all of that was taken away from them overnight. I still remember the night that the Taliban took over the capital in Afghanistan, over Kabul, receiving messages on social media from girls that I didn't know, asking or saying that they have no idea what to do now because they are in the capital, they are studying there, they live in hostels and they're studying in universities, their families are in regional Afghanistan, and they know that they will be imprisoned and they have no idea what life will hold for them going forward, even to the point that they were scared that they don't know what to wear because their clothes obviously will not be in line with what the Taliban would want them to be seen outside. What I wanted to say was that 2/3 of the population in Afghanistan is under 20 years old, which means that a majority of the population in Afghanistan did not grow up under the last Taliban regime in the 90s, or they were very young and they would have only heard stories of it from their parents who have endured it. So it's an entirely new generation who's being subject to the same persecution, the same oppression that they thought they had gotten rid of in Afghanistan. And what's happened in the rest of the world with everything else that's going on is that we don't hear about this happening in Afghanistan. And somehow I feel like the oppression of women and all sorts of violations of human rights in Afghanistan has kind of become a normal thing. It's what we would expect to happen to people in Afghanistan. It's what we would expect to happen to women in Afghanistan. And there should be an outrage in the global community, but we're not seeing that.
Well, I'm curious to ask you that as well, actually, because we see ever since October 8, pretty much the day after Hamas's attack on Israel, and then Israel responded, ever since we've seen protests in Australia alone every single weekend in our major capital cities against what's happening in Gaza, which in and of itself is an atrocity. You know, we see attention on Ukraine when the war first broke out, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, and there was this public outcry. Why do you think there isn't space, or at least the same attention being given to what is happening in Afghanistan by the global community? And I'm talking about, I guess, us as people and members of the community, as opposed to governments or, you know, big bodies saying things about it. The people that we go to school with and go to work with. Why isn't there more outcry among us?
I wouldn't want to say that it's a matter of comparison, or that we want the same amount of attention given or we have a very limited amount of attention and therefore can only give it to certain issues. Every one of those issues that you've outlined deserve our focus and energy. I think what's happening with Afghanistan is that after decades of war, and then the international community's portrayal of the oppressed people of Afghanistan, the world has become desensitized to the suffering of people in Afghanistan. It's just something that we feel really sorry for, but we're not driven to action by it. And that needs to change. That needs to stop. We can't place a different kind of value to the lives of women and the lives of people in Afghanistan compared to other parts of the world.
Okay, well, what can we do then? And I'm keen to hear your perspective on not only within our own communities, but what do our governments need to be doing? What does the UN need to be doing to fight what is happening in Afghanistan?
There's a lot that happens in Afghanistan that doesn't make it outside because of a ban on press freedom, ban on journalists exercising their duties and responsibilities, even to the point that questioning the ban on education for girls is banned. So you can imagine how much happens there that we just don't know about. I would really, really encourage every single one of your listeners to engage with people from Afghanistan. There are hundreds and thousands of advocates inside and outside Afghanistan, particularly women inside Afghanistan who are protesting, who are resisting, to amplify their voices as much as possible, because it's their voices that need to be at the center of leading this resistance. We cannot forget that. Governments can do so much more than just a few sympathetic words. Australia particularly was involved for the 20 years international intervention in Afghanistan. Australia helped restore that democracy and human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. And then we just left and turned our back towards them. In terms of putting pressure on the Taliban, every diplomatic levers that we can pull, we should be pulling that. The Taliban are still a listed terrorist organization, across the world, and they should be treated as such. We're still providing aid to Afghanistan. That aid can be conditional to ensure that at least somewhat women's freedoms or women's human rights are upheld as a condition to receiving aid. The UN experts and advocates from across Afghanistan, diaspora and women in Afghanistan are calling what's happening there a gender apartheid, and it should be treated as such. There needs to be much more strategizing at a global level. All these governments who uphold human rights, they really need to come together and not just discuss, but take action, take concrete action about Afghanistan, because we cannot have another generation or more wasted to this oppression or to the terrorism of this terrorist regime in Afghanistan.
Shabnam Safa, thank you so much for joining us today. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sacha.
That was Shabnam Safa speaking with me there. And we have put some accounts and campaigns you can engage with in the show notes of this episode if you want to check them out. And that is all for this episode of The Briefing. A reminder, we put out full eps of our weekend briefing chats on YouTube. You can search Listener Newsroom to see them. And you can also catch up with our other content on TikTok at Listener Newsroom. We're also on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And if you got something out of this ep, why not share it with someone you think might enjoy it as well? I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.
Listener.